What up, HyperChange? Welcome to another episode. Airbnb earnings are hot off the press, so we are going to take a look at these. The stock has been going crazy. It ran up 5% today during normal trading and then spiked to 163 after hours, up 11% after the 5% move. Then as the conference call and results synced in, now the stock is right back around 141 where it started the day. So crazy roller coaster for Airbnb. Let's dive into the financial results real quick. Here is Main Street data. I'll put a link below if you want to follow along. $3.73 billion in revenue. So this was a slight deceleration in growth in last quarter, 9.9%, down from 10.6%. But overall, the gross profit growth was faster. There was a little bit of a hard comp due to some gift cards. So this is worse than it looks. But the core business here chugging along at 10%, highest revenue quarter in the company's history. Now, keep in mind, if you've been following my channel and you're used to seeing Tesla or other high growth companies, Airbnb is a very different beast. The core business right now is growing about 10-ish%. Can that accelerate next year? Maybe. And then the real story is about all these other crazy new businesses that they're planning to launch next year, which were talked about on the conference call, but we're going to get into that later. First, more on the financials, this sort of core beast of Airbnb that's chugging along. So if we dive into the gross profit here, the gross profit, and really zoom out, you can see that the core sort of tidal wave of the profitability of Airbnb business continues to have more momentum than ever. $3.27 billion in gross profit here. I know it says revenue, but it's gross profit, $2.62 billion. So the gross profit year-over-year growth here, I just wanted to highlight in on this, now 25%. Up from just 9.8%. So they've had more expenses here, but this core sort of earnings trajectory of the gross profit continues to chug upwards from the real estate business. And I think this is sort of the bright spot. Also, last year, if we look at operating income, the very seasonal business for Airbnb. So this is always the strongest quarter for them. This is actually their highest earnings and operating income ever, $1.52 billion in the quarter, $1.52 billion in profit in this quarter. And as you'll see, Q4 last year, they lost $500 million, but in the previous Q4s, they've actually been right around break even. So I'm curious if they can post another around break even Q4, show a big year-over-year improvement, and post about $2 billion in earnings for the year. That's what I'm kind of looking at. Now, let's dive into the shareholder letter here. The shareholder letter, I'll put a link below. Highly recommend checking this out if you want to learn more about Airbnb. So $3.7 million in revenue plus 10%, $1.4 billion in net income, extremely profitable once again, $2 billion of adjusted EBITDA, which is their sort of core earnings number. I think this is a little bit generous, but that's what they're reporting. Free cash flow, $1.1 billion in the quarter, $4.1 billion in the past 12 months. A little lighter than expected, but still one of the most profitable businesses in all of technology with 38% margins here. But they're investing a little bit in growth. That's why we're going to see this cash flow margin decrease a little bit next quarter and next year. And that's a big reason why I think the stock is down. But overall, bookings and experiences were up. Now, experiences booking of 8% growth was the lowest in a while. This is going to accelerate. We're gonna zoom into that later. Tons of juicy details here in the report, but here's another look at that revenue trend. As you can see, the record quarter for Airbnb keeps chugging along, keeps growing. That core engine of the retail business here. The share buyback, which I think has been one of my highlights for Airbnb. They bought back over 1.1 billion shares of common stock during the quarter. That's more than 749 million last quarter. 1.1 billion divided by 90 days. Like, I'm pretty sure that's like $12 million worth of stock a day, including weekends. So if you take trading days, that's what Airbnb is buying $14 million of stock in the open market of its own stock. So this is the fully diluted share count. The one that's on the earnings statement is a little bit lower than this. It's 642 million, I believe, but you can see Airbnb actively reducing their share count. I believe this was 673 million last quarter. So an 8 million reduction in share count in one quarter with a company with 665 million outstanding shares. That's an over 1% reduction quarter over quarter in their share count, if I'm correct. So let me just, I don't know. Let me just double check that. Pulling up the Q2 report because I'm curious here. If they really bought back more than 1% of their stock in the quarter, I mean, that would be pretty insane here. But if I remember correct, yeah. So 673 was in June 2024 was the fully diluted outstanding share count. And now it's 665 in September, just 3 months later. They've bought back 8 million shares, 2% of their outstanding share count has reduced in a quarter. So this is what's interesting about Airbnb. And well, there's a couple more numbers that I want to go into, but at its core, you're getting this business that right now is growing at 10%, the core business growing at 10%, and then you have this 5% tailwind of a stock buyback because they're making so much cash, they're buying back their stocks. Your earnings per share are actually compounding at about 15% right now. But I think we're about to get a reacceleration of the core business, and then you get these layers on top next year, and we have a reacceleration of growth, and that's where all the excitement comes in, and that's why Airbnb is buying stock hand over fist right now. Diving into a little more of the numbers here, they have so much awesome information. 122.8 million nights and experiences booked. So this is that 8% year-over-year growth that is going down. Basically, they had this insane spike as people resumed from COVID, and then the growth rate's been slowing down as Airbnb literally is so big. Like 500 million people have booked an Airbnb already this year. Like, that's insane. 400 million or something get night stays already this year. Like, you can't get much bigger than that, That's 5% of Earth. So Airbnb, but now if you listen to Chesky on the call, because of what they're doing to expand supply and all this new momentum, Brian Chesky's saying that this number could accelerate and is going to be higher. So this might be the bottoming out and sort of final bottoming quarter. And now we're going to see that reversal in Airbnb's core business. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Here's the the first 9 months of 2024, 8.6 billion in revenue, 2.1 billion in profit, up from 2 billion in the first 9 months of last year. So then once again, if they can do that break even quarter next quarter in Q4, which is seasonally weak for them, then we're looking at 2.1 billion in earnings for the full year of Airbnb. Here you can see that share count going down every single quarter, fully diluted 642 million on the quarterly number, which is the most accurate one. So 642 million shares, that continues to go down. That's a huge tailwind for your earnings per share. I thought this was an interesting metric. Another way to sort of judge the core health of Airbnb's real estate business and how it keeps chugging along. $64.2 billion worth of gross bookings in the first 9 months of 2024 versus 57.8 last year. 380 million nights booked versus 350 million. So the momentum continues for Airbnb here, but it's just so big that they're reaching the limits, and that's why they're expanding into new ways of growth. So now let's talk about what happened in the conference call, because at first everyone's like, wow, this is an insane quarter, and then it took a turn and the stock started dipping after hours. The biggest reason for that is because Brian Chesky and the team basically guided that margins are going to go down a little bit next year as they invest in growth. So Brian Chesky's essentially categorized Airbnb's stage in a few different ways. He said, chapter 1, we had this massive growth, essentially stratospheric hyper growth. Then what happens? COVID used 80% of the business overnight, got to go profitable, got to IPO, had to rebuild the foundation of Airbnb. Now they want to enter this new chapter. They've rebuilt the app. The technology investments have been made to make this a platform where they can go beyond travel. Brian Chesky thinks he can hit $100 billion worth of travel, $64 billion already the first 9 months of this year. I think we continue to grow. I would have liked to see a more focus on long-term stays. I personally think I've been living on Airbnb and I'm loving it. And I think they should triple down on this idea of the long-term stay. That wasn't mentioned much on the conference call, but anyway, we can get to that later. But now Airbnb is setting itself up for investing in these new services that they think can add $1 billion in revenue per year. So I've been trying to think about what these are. Is this like launching a cleaning service? Is it like some sort of Airbnb maps that recommends where to go once you get somewhere? They're also saying, Brian Chesky's saying in May, they're going to launch these new services. And he keeps comparing it to Amazon, which is very interesting. And how Amazon started with books, and then they expanded into all these adjacent categories. And he said they've gotten to $100 billion with their first category of travel and short-term stays and vacation. They want to get beyond travel. They want to launch all these new multi-billion-dollar opportunities that could incrementally accelerate growth next year, but will take about 5 years to get big. So we're in this, and this is such a different company than Tesla, but it's so fascinating because you have Airbnb, which has built this massive real estate software business that's insanely profitable, that continues to grow at 10%, but is almost maxed out because it's become so big. Now it's finding new ways to morph, and I think will continue to compound at 10 to 15% for the next couple of years. Could do better if they get into long-term stays. But you have that cooking. In the meantime, you're buying back 1.5% of your share count every quarter. Then you start to layer in these new services that accelerate earnings and revenue growth even more. And then that's where I think we get this, exciting upside potential for Airbnb. So I'm still holding on to the stock. I'm more bullish than ever. It's going to take time for this to play out. It's going to take a few quarters. They're going to have to launch these new services. There's going to be investments in 2025. Wall Street might not like that. But in the meantime, Airbnb can continue buying back a ton of its stock on the cheap, which eventually is, once everything normalizes and, they reap the reward from these investments, is going to compound to even higher earnings per share. So I'm very, very curious what's happening with Airbnb and what they are cooking, because Brian Chesky has been very tight-lipped about what new services they're launching, but he said they're going to be in 100 cities the day they're launched, and they want them to be big. Like, they're not going to roll them out in a small way. So, and we all know about experiences. That probably hasn't been the growth engine that people have thought it could be. So these are other swings at the bat in similar ways, and it's going to be very, very interesting. Another great tidbit that I got from the conference call was they launched the co-hosting marketplace with 10,000 hosts. They've already had 20,000 new hosts apply, which is way more than they were expecting. That is a very promising indicator that they can bring on more supply onto the platform and kind of continue to grow the real estate business next year if that co-host momentum keeps up. So, long story short, I think, and Chesky had a very interesting answer when asked about Paris versus New York and how he thinks they can come back into New York and how it's actually backfired on New York in the way that they've worked with Airbnb. I totally agree. As someone who travels to New York, it sucks if you want to stay in a hotel. You got to stay in Midtown. The prices have skyrocketed since they banned Airbnb. And I just stayed in Airbnb in Brooklyn. It was awesome, but I had to do 30 days because of the new laws. So if those get changed, that could be huge upside to Airbnb as well. And I don't know. Lots of interesting tidbits. Like Brian Chesky saying these new products and services, you won't just book them when you travel. You'll book them in your hometown. And he hinted about like what you'd want to do on a Saturday. And he even mentions that with Airbnb, what they did for vacation rentals, he wants to bring to 50 to 100 new categories. So I don't know, Brian, this is a very interesting moment for Airbnb. They are morphing into something new. I am extremely excited about the potential. What they built in short-term rentals is an insanely massive and profitable business that has changed the world and changed travel and will continue to be the blue chip and moneymaker for Airbnb. But I have a feeling Brian Chesky's in founder mode. He's cooking up some insane products and services. There's going to be investments. There's going to be high risk. But I love that Airbnb is on offense. They have fixed their business after the COVID woes. They figured out how to IPO. They become an amazing public company. And now they're back in offense and growth mode. And I think that is very exciting for shareholders. It'll be very interesting to see what they launch. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Long story short, I've been buying Airbnb stock up until this point. I am holding my position here. I'm very excited about the future, hoping that I can get in touch with the Airbnb team and investor relations team and just kind of open up some communication with them and start have them lean into the retail investor movement, which I can see is booming here. So leave me a comment if you own Airbnb stock. Let me know what you think about the conference call. What moonshot do you have for what services they're going to launch next year? But overall, I think Airbnb is going to keep chugging along, growing 15%. Hopefully they can stay above 10%, keep buying back 1% of stock a quarter if the stock doesn't pop way higher. And then May is when we're going to get that big announcement. So see y'all next time. This is HyperChange. Peace.